I've got some good confidence there. It's good to see that next generation coming up. Let's see. So let's get started on the bottom of the page, the middle, where the paragraph where it says, while the main message of worship, and we'll get started there. While the main message of worship was the same in the Old Testament as the New, the forms of worship are very different. In the following verse, Paul helps us understand one reason why Old Testament worship was so different from ours. So I'm going to read that section unless someone wants to read it. We have a volunteer to read Galatians chapter 4.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ron.
Here.
Yep.
As long as the heir is a child, he is no different from a slave. Although he owns the whole estate, he is subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by his father. But when the time had fully come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under law, that we might receive the full rights of sons.
Okay, so Paul is writing to the Galatian church, and he's explaining that the Old Testament was like God dealing with a minor child. Minor children need a lot of instructions about what to do and how to live. You don't give them a lot of freedoms. It's not until you become of majority age, and even in our own culture, it's the same way, right? There's a lot of things that you don't get to do when you're 4 years old, right? When you're 4 years old, you don't get to drive a car. When you're 4 years old, you don't get to go to the bar and have a beer, unless you're in Wisconsin, then I guess you can. But most places you can't. When you're 4 years old, you are restricted in how you have. There are rules, right? You have a bedtime, a curfew that's set by your parents, And when you're 4, it's probably like 7 o'clock, right? Go to bed at 7 o'clock. I don't care whether you're tired or not. It doesn't matter. It's 7 o'clock. You're going to bed, right? But then when we become adults, when we become the age of majority, we have a lot more freedom given to us. We can decide to go to bed when we want to go to bed. We can decide. We can drive a car. We can go to the tavern and have a beer. There's a lot less restrictions put on us when we become minor. So Paul is making this comparison, and he's saying, in the Old Testament, God's children were minors, and so I had to give them all of these rules. But now that Jesus has come, and the church is all grown up into a big adult with Jesus, we can now give you a lot of freedoms that we weren't able to give to the minor children. And so Old Testament worship had a lot more laws than our New Testament worship. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So God created his Old Testament people a bit like a child, or an adult treats a child. In other words, God made all the worship decisions for his people, where and how they would worship. Right? When you are a child, you don't necessarily get to pick what clothes you're going to wear to school, right? Mom lays it out the night before, and you have to wear that clothes to school. When you become older, Mom might say, okay, pick something out of the closet or the dresser, right? And you as you get bigger, you can take on more responsibility. So we are blessed with a great deal of freedom in how we worship as New Testament Christians. In fact, some Old Testament worship forms, would be inappropriate for us to follow. So in other words, when I'm an adult, I don't follow the rules that some of the rules of being a child do apply to being an adult, right? I mean, probably good to go to bed when I'm tired, right? That's kind of the rule that, but there will be a consequence if I don't go to bed when I'm tired, all right? I probably should, eat something other than macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, because if I don't, there'll be a consequence. But I have the freedom to eat macaroni and cheese and hot dogs for every meal, frozen pizza, as an adult, right? Let's take a look at the way God instructed his Old Testament people to worship. Again, we're not going to try and imitate this, but we are going to learn some things from it. All right, one place of worship. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, I don't know if anyone wants to read that section. It's verse 2. Well, it's a couple of verses, but... I can read it. Deuteronomy 12. Destroy completely all the places on the high mountains and on the hills and under every spreading tree where the nations you are dispossessing worship their gods. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way, but you are to seek the place the Lord your God will choose from among all your tribes and put his name there for his dwelling. To that place you must go. There bring your burnt offerings and sacrifices, your tithes and special gifts, what you have vowed to give, what you have vowed to give, and your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. Okay, so God said, first step as you enter into this land of Canaan is I do not want you to worship the way the former residents of Canaan worshiped. Now, when you get there, you're going to see that they had idols worshiping their gods all over the place. They were on every high place, every spreading tree, it says, on the hills, so that they would pick like high visibility spots, and that's where they would put their Asherah poles or their idols to Baal or to Moloch or to many of the different gods that existed in Canaan. And God says, I don't want you to do that. Okay? Do not do what they do. Okay? Instead, I'm going to give you one place to worship. They worship wherever they feel like it. I'm going to give you one place to worship, and that's the only place I want you to worship. Do not worship me anywhere else. Do not bring your offerings anywhere else. Do not bring your tithes anywhere else. Do not bring your burnt offerings. Nope. One spot. That's the place I want you to go. So where did the pagan Canaanites worship their gods? Well, all over, right? By contrast, what did the Lord insist about his own worship? And why do you think he did this? Why do you think God said, do the opposite of what the people that lived in the land before you did? Right. There is only one true God. And in many pagan cultures, and still today, there's all of these different gods that control various different components of life, right? So if you wanted good weather, there was a weather god. If you wanted good crops, there was a crop god. If there was a sun god and a moon god and a fishing god and a hunting god and all of there was a fertility god and all of the if you wanted blessings, there were gods that specialized in that particular blessing, and then you would go to that God. And so God says that there's only one God. Right? So he's teaching them that, and he's teaching us that there's only one God. You don't need to go to a bunch of different places to get these different blessings and be afraid, oh, I forgot this God. Oh, shoot, now he's going to be mad at me. And because I didn't give a sacrifice to that God, now my crop is going to fail. Oh, I knew I forgot something. Last night, one of my Zachary hit a deer with his car. So I guess if I was a pagan living in this kind of world, I would say, "Oh, I forgot to make a sacrifice to whatever God is in charge of the deer." I don't know whichever one that would be, right? So that's how they lived, and God says, "Don't live like that." Why else do you think he did it? Well, if there's a lot of different places you can worship and a lot of different ways you can worship, then there's going to be all these different ideas of who God is and what he wants and how to make him happy, right? God says, one God, one way to make it happen. It's very simple. He took what was very confusing and he actually made it very, very simple. All right. As part of his covenant on Mount Sinai, the Lord gave clear instructions about the structure that would be the center of true worship. Since the Israelites were still journeying in the desert, it would be a portable structure. So we call that portable structure, do you know what we call it? It's a tent, but God's first house of worship was called the tabernacle, right? It was a tent. It was a large tent, very large tent, but it was a tent, and it was portable, and it could be picked up, the whole thing, the whole worship could be picked up and moved in one day. That's all it took. One day to tear it down, one day to set it up. So however many days you traveled, this one day. And that was the first thing they did. And the last thing they did when they left. Right? So they got all their own personal belongings ready, packed all their bags, packed up their own tent, and then the people that were in charge of packing up the tabernacle packed that up last, and then they left. And in the course of the 40-year wandering in the wilderness, they moved the tabernacle about 40 times. So roughly once a year. It wasn't actually once a year, but roughly, if you break it down, that's kind of how it plays out. Okay. The first house of worship was called the tabernacle. It may help to think of the tabernacle and later the temple, which followed the same design, as a series of 3 rectangles, one inside the other. Okay, so you got the big outside rectangle. That was made of curtains, okay, and that kept people from wandering into this outer courtyard of the temple. The big rectangle inside the rectangle was called the holy place, and then the cube was the most holy place. The worshipers could and were expected to come inside the outer walls and enter into the courtyard of the temple, and there they would bring their sacrifices. Every morning and every evening, sacrifices were required by God. And then on special holy days, additional sacrifices were required by God. And so the goat, the sheep, whatever it was, the bull, pigeon, in some cases, whatever the animal was actually killed by the person who brought it and then was given to the priest. And the priest is the one who then actually butchered it, we would say, cut it up. And for some types of offerings, the whole thing was thrown up onto the really big fire that the burnt offerings were offered on. And then some of the offerings, it depended upon which one, and God did specify exactly how he wanted it done, portions of that animal were burnt, but the rest of the animal was actually given to the priest as a part of their pay, so to speak. Okay, if you flip the page, little picture there. The outer courtyard measured 150 by 75 feet and was surrounded by a curtain. This was where the majority of the Israelites could gather to worship the Lord. There were 2 important furnishings in the courtyard: a bronze basin for the priest washing and the altar of burnt offering. So the bronze basin contained a tremendous amount of water. It was huge. I think I read 11,000 gallons. I don't know. It's a lot of water, right? And the altar itself was much bigger than you're initially thinking. When we think altar, we think, little altar up there, right? Just this little thing. No, the altar had steps going up it because it was so big, and the fire was up on top. And when you think about all the animals they're burning every single day, it had to be a pretty big thing. Day after day, the Israelites came to this altar to offer their rams and bulls, sheep and goats. It was here that God introduced them to the most important worship principle. God would accept the sacrifice of a substitute as payment for their sins. And we're going to see, obviously, what God is setting them up for in the New Testament, right? This is all a foreshadowing to the way that we worship. That God will accept a blood sacrifice for the payment of sins. The sinner themselves does not die, but a substitute does die and sheds blood, and that blood washes the sinner clean. The main tabernacle tent was a 4-layered tent laid over posts and crossbars of wood overlaid with gold. It measured 45 feet by 15 feet. Only the priests were permitted to enter this tent, and it consisted of 2 rooms. So in this inner courtroom, the people were not allowed to go. The priest could go in there. There's the holy place. It was 15 feet by 30 feet, and it had 3 important furnishings. There was a small altar of burnt incense, symbolizing the prayers of the people rising to God. Now, if you've ever been to a Roman Catholic service where maybe it was a festival service, like it was a special day, not just a regular Sunday, you've perhaps seen the priest or one of the officiants at the worship service with an incense burner. It's normally like a metal ball, and inside there's a coal, and then in that coal chamber they put some incense on top of it, and then it smokes, and then the priest or whoever it is walks around with that thing, and it spreads that smell all over. Well, the incense that they normally burn is frankincense, and it smells really good. When I was in Ethiopia, they follow a more Old Testament style of worship. So their temples or churches have inside of them a Holy of Holies and a holy place separated out by a curtain. Okay, so, and in their temples, churches, they have a church for women, their own separate entrance. They go in, the women worship on one side of the church, and there's a wall, and then the men worship on the other side of the church. And they're oftentimes doing exactly the same thing, but they're just separate. And when you walk in during a worship service, the entire building, and they have lower ceilings than what we have, but the entire building is filled with incense. They've been burning incense for hours. And you can't even see from the back of the church to the front, like the Canadian wildfire. But because that incense is thick, and it smells good, I think. Every time we walked into the churches, you could kind of tell how recently they had worshiped by how strong the odor was. And we actually had the opportunity to be in church while they were worshiping, so it was really thick smoke. But it's symbolic. That incense burning, that smoke going up, is symbolic of the prayers of God's people ascending to Him. There is nothing wrong with that symbolism, is there? That's good symbolism. We could do that, right? We could do that, and there would be value to it. I think there would be value to it. The Roman Catholic Church still does it, and they do it for this reason. This is why they do it. There's some value here. Now, all the ways that God instructed His Old Testament people to worship are no longer applied to us in a sense, but they are pictures to us. So there's that burnt incense back there. There's a table of wood overlaid with gold for the 12 loaves of sacred bread. Don't think Wonder Bread. Okay, don't think Wonder Bread. They're 12 loaves of sacred bread are round. They're about this big around, and they're stacked up 6 on one stack and 6 on another, and they're pretty flat. They're kind of like maybe a little puffier version of pita bread for us. That's what we would call it. So go to Aldi and get yourself a package of pita bread, 6 of them, and then get another one, stack them up. That's what this looked like. Fresh every day, they made this bread, put it on there for the Lord. Now, of course, the Lord doesn't eat bread, so he actually, I think, gave it to the priest. Day old. They always got the day old stuff. I'm sure it was still good. Then there was a golden lampstand with 7 branches whose lights burned all night to signify God's constant presence among his people. So why do you suppose we have candelabras with 7 on them? I think I know why, right? We're imitating something here, right? And why do you suppose we have this? And I've never done a deep dive on the eternal light, right? I think it comes out of Roman Catholic tradition, but I think they would probably trace it back to the Old Testament. So we have this light, right? The little red thing on there, and it's actually got a switch in the back, and I can turn it off, which is kind of silly. It's supposed to be an eternal light, and I can turn it off. But we do leave it on most of the time. I mean, unless somebody forgets and accidentally switches it off, it stays on overnight. And the whole point of it is to be this constant presence in the temple to remind God's people that God does not slumber and he does not sleep, that he is always available for his people, right? Then we have the most holy place. It was a 15-foot cube, perfect symmetry to symbolize the perfection of God. It only contained one piece of furniture, the Ark of the Covenant. It was a special box chest topped by cherubim with outstretched wings. The wings of the cherubim come together in the middle, and that is where the presence of God was inside of the temple. But now most people couldn't see that because only one guy ever entered the Holy of Holies, and only ever on one special day in the church year. Does anyone know what day of the year the high priest got to go into the Holy of Holies? The Day of Atonement, which is, what is it in Hebrew? Yom Kippur, right? You've probably heard that term. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Okay, and it's the day that the high priest would put the sins of the people of Israel onto a scapegoat who would then be sent off out into the desert and take the sins of the people away from God. But then he would also go into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle the blood of a different goat, not the one that they let go, onto the Ark of the Covenant. What was inside the Ark of the Covenant? Really, 3 things.
The stone tablets.
Yeah, the stone tablets. So the second version of the 10 Commandments, because you remember Moses kind of broke the first set. So this is the second set of the 10 Commandments. That's in there. What else?
Manna.
What'd you say?
Manna.
Yeah, a jar of manna to remind the people how God provided for his people when they were out in the desert. Last thing.
Aaron's staff.
Yeah, Aaron's staff was in there, the one that he threw down onto the ground and it turned into a snake, and the one that budded and turned into like a fruit tree or whatever it was, budded into a flowering staff. Miracles that God gave Aaron to do to convince Pharaoh to let them go. Yep. So, okay. You can read more about the tabernacle and its furnishings in Exodus chapter 25 through 21. A lot of instructions there. The tabernacle served its purpose for more than 450 years. During the reign of King Solomon, the temple was built in Jerusalem. The temple was a more lavishly decorated form of the tabernacle. The 2 rooms were exactly twice as large, but it followed exactly the same design. more than 23 tons of gold were used for the most holy place alone. So that's really incredible, right? Now, when we were remodeling this facility and then building that one next door, some of this stuff kind of helps me as a pastor, and I help my people think about God's house. Now, how much gold is in this room? I've got a little on my finger. Maybe you do too. I got some on both fingers, right? But I don't think there's any, really. There's brass, but I don't think there's any gold. So, however, we did not follow the pattern. We didn't say, okay, we need 23 tons of gold just to make that little sanctuary area up there. Okay, we didn't do that. But what did we do? That kind of is following that pattern.
The altar.
Okay, we do have an altar, yeah. Oddly enough, right, the altar was not inside the church for the temple or the tabernacle. It was outside. Well, when you read the description of the tabernacle as well as the temple, you realize that God cared what that place looked like. And he did not go to the thriftiest church supply store and say, hey, what kind of odd lots do you have that you'll sell me for half price? I think that should be good enough for the church. Right? This is high quality stuff. And so when we remodeled here, we tried, and I think we did a good job, we tried to say we're not going to chintz out. We're not going to cut corners. We're not going to find the cheapest bid on the cheapest way to do things, and we're going to do it that way. Because this is, I know this is not the tabernacle and it's not the temple, but this is God's house. It's our house for God, where we come and hear his word, where we come and receive his sacrament. And so we do want it to reflect our love for God and our respect and honor of God. So it is going to be fancier than your house. Now, I understand that not every church designs it that way, right? I mean, I've been to some churches where they pretty much are pretty standard. There's really no upgrades or anything, just pretty standard stuff, right? And I understand that there's budgets and you need to work within a budget, but at the same time, I think the goal is not low. The goal is, let's do this as nicely as we can, I guess, without putting in 23 tons of gold. I somehow think we'd still be saving if we still have the. No, we'd have the blonde birch paneling, and we'd have that yucky tile up there, and you'd all not be able to read anything in here because we like tripled the lighting, right? And we wouldn't have this nice wood floor and all kinds of stuff, right? I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I meant to. So when you're trying to line up the chapter in the book from Sinai to Calvary, and what we're covering, we skip around. And so the last page of this study, if you flip to the last page of the study, there's a little guide back there for you. And I should have pointed this out earlier, but I didn't. But it tells you, week 4, it's actually chapter 6 in Jeske's book. So if you've been wondering why that doesn't line up, it's because of this. So when we get done covering week 4, which is obviously not this week, but we move on to week 7, the chapters are 7 and 11. So you can kind of see that there. So that'll help you as you go along. I just want to cover a little bit more before we wrap it up here. Quick timeline of God's house of worship. So from 1445 to 966 BC, the tabernacle is in use, various locations, ending in Jerusalem. That's that 450 years that the tabernacle was in use. Solomon starts, David put together all the materials to build the temple, but God told him he was not allowed to build the temple because he had too much blood on his hands. And so God said, your son Solomon's going to build me the temple, because he was a man of peace and David was a man of war. And so Solomon had that privilege. And so that gets done there in 966. And it lasts until 586 BC. And then in 586 BC, the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. And it was destroyed. But one thing they did do is, can you imagine if you're plundering a city and you discover that there's 26 tons of gold in one room alone? Right? So actually what they did is they actually did not do what a lot of plunderers do, which is break it all into pieces and take it back. They actually kept a lot of it whole and carted it back to Babylon. And when the 70 years of Babylonian captivity were over, God moved Cyrus, who was a Persian king that had taken over from the Babylonians, moved Cyrus to give back to the Jews much of the furnishings for the temple. So not all of it, but much of it was given to them and brought back. In 516, dedication of the second temple, which was built by Zerubbabel. This is like, in the Bible, this is like Nehemiah, Ezra era. So if you want to read about it, that's Nehemiah and Ezra. Before and during the lifetime of Jesus, this temple and its grounds were extensively remodeled by King Herod, right? So the second temple was not nearly as awesome as Solomon's temple. As you can imagine, in the course of 70 years in Babylon, some of the gold walked away, right? And the Jews who came back from Babylon were, for the most part, pretty poor. And so they weren't able to really bring a lot back with them. So the people who had seen Solomon's temple and then watched this new group of Babylonian captives come back and start to build the new temple, the second temple, they cried. They cried because it's like, oh, it's just a shadow of what it once was. It's not even close to what it once was. All right, 70 AD, the second temple is completely destroyed by the Romans. Jesus, of course, predicted this with his disciples at one time when they were marveling at the temple and looking at the huge stones that were used to build the temple. And Jesus said to them, mark my words, time is coming when not one of these stones will be left standing on top of another. And it's true. The foundation is still there. You can actually visit the foundation. I will be in February, Lord willing. It's called, there's one exposed basement wall, we would call it, that is called the Weeping Wall. The Jews go there and weep because their temple is gone, never coming back. What's on top of the Temple Mount? Like the platform where the temple used to exist? Does anyone know? Yeah, it's a mosque called the Dome on the Rock. And it's beautiful, covered in gold. And it's a beautiful thing. But It's basically God's way of saying to Jewish people, that way of worshiping is done, it's over, you're never going to have another temple. You're never going to worship the way I originally asked you to worship, because all along, God never intended this to be the permanent system of worship, right? It was all pointing to Jesus, the one sacrifice. All of the daily sacrifices, all of the animals whose blood was shed, the temple itself, all of it pointing to Jesus. Jesus is the new temple. Jesus is the new sacrifice. Jesus is the center of our worship. And so when you come into a church, we've got the big cross, right? Jesus is the center of our worship, and so we want him to have a prominent place in our house of God. Though the tabernacle announced to his people that he would live with them, what two future events was God foreshadowing through this tabernacle? So God said, I will live with you in the middle of your camp. And of course, the whole camp was surrounding the tabernacle, which sat right in the center. But you can't come too close, right? You can come and get into the outer courtyard, but you cannot come any further than that. Because I am a holy God, and you are a sinful people. And the only way that you can get your offerings from you to me is through a mediator, right? Through the priest. They needed the priest. The priest was the only one that could go into that holy place and offer the incense. And they were the only one, of course, the high priest was the only one who could go into the inner sanctum there. And so God is saying, you need a representative. Of course, that is Jesus. Jesus is our representative. He goes to God up in heaven where we cannot go, and if we were to go there without Jesus, we would immediately die, just like the Jewish people would have died if they had gone into the holy place. If you want to come and visit God, you need a mediator, and that mediator for them was the priest, and for us is Jesus. Jesus is our priest. Jesus was asked by a woman in Samaria whether the true worship of God had to happen in Jerusalem or at Mount Gerizim in Samaria. Do you remember what he said? How did he answer the woman? He said, a time is coming when you, meaning the believers, will not worship me in Jerusalem or on Mount Gerizim, but you will worship me in spirit and in truth. Okay? So Jesus is predicting a time when we can worship God wherever we want. Right here on the corner of East School Street and Rubicon Street in the village in Neosho. God does not say you only can worship in one place anymore. We have tremendous freedom. Last one there, last discussion question. How does an understanding of the tabernacle temple add to your understanding of this verse? When Jesus had cried out in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So Jesus dies on Good Friday. All four Gospels record it, and some of them include some details, and others don't include all the same details. But one of them, at least one of them, tells us that Matthew tells us that the curtain in the temple in Jerusalem. So Jesus dies outside of Jerusalem, outside the walls of Jerusalem, Mount Calvary. And he dies there, Mount Calvary, dies on Calvary, and back in town, on the Temple Mount, where the temple was at that exact moment that Jesus dies, even though it's I don't know how far away it is. I guess I'll find out when I get there. I'll let you know. The curtain that separated the people's area, the outer courtyard, from the holy place rips in two, and now the people can enter into the holy place. It's clearly, God is clearly sending a message to his people that Jesus has finished this temple worship business, right? You can now come straight to God through Jesus. Through Jesus, we have access to God, direct access to God. We don't have to wait for a priest to cleanse himself and to go in there and to talk to God for us. We have God's own Son, who is our high priest, who intercedes for us on our behalf. A reminder that what used to separate us from God, our sinfulness, is taken care of on the cross. So now I can just barge right on in to the throne room of God and ask him whatever I want. All right, let's close with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the worship system you put in place for your Old Testament people. And in that worship system, you gave us so many pictures of our own worship system and the way that you want us to view worship as a way to be with you. You want to be with your people, and we want to be with you, and you have made that possible now through Jesus. We thank you for his sacrifice on our behalf. We ask that we would never take for granted this opportunity to be with you in your house and to hear your word and to receive your sacrament. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I am going to Israel February 17th, coming back on March 2nd. Was not looking good for a while. I couldn't get a group to go, but now we have a nice sized group. Not my original group, actually going with a group of LCMS pastors, Missouri Synod pastors. They're not all pastors, just two of them. And my friend Chris from Ethiopia is going to meet me in Tel Aviv. So we're going to do the tour together. And there's a side trip extension at the end of it. After 10 days in Israel, we're going to spend 3 days in Egypt. That should be awesome. I haven't checked that out yet. Don't know. I think I'm probably good because of my trip to Zambia. Yeah, my African trip. I don't think they have any really strange diseases in Israel. I just have to be good at dodging nuclear weapons. That's all. What? I'm undone here? Oh.